On behalf of SBUP, we welcome you to this portion of the Urban Innovation Symposium we like to call Building a Solidarity Economy. My name is Tolu, and I serve on the executive board of the Society of Black Urban Planners. Next slide. So for our panel this afternoon, we'll be diving into the world of solidarity economies, and not only its current role, but its potential in what we call reshaping the normal. We're joined this afternoon by four amazing panelists who, from each of their unique backgrounds and experiences, utilize and really push the boundaries of cooperative economics in their professional practice and research. So I'll just do a brief introduction of each of our panelists, and then I'll pass it over for our discussion. First up, we have with us Professor Renee Hatcher. Professor Hatcher is an assistant professor and the director of Community Enterprise and Solidarity Economy Law Clinic at UIC Law, where she and her team provides free legal support to grassroots organizations, community-based businesses, cooperatives, and other solidarity economy enterprises. Professor Hatcher is a human rights and solidarity economy lawyer by trade, and she's also a member of the leadership team for Resist, Reimagine, Rebuild, Partners in Abolition, Transformation, Healing, Solidarity, Black Lawyer Solidarity Economy Network, and Law for Black Lives Movement Lawyering Squad. She served as a board member for the New Economy Coalition and the Detroit Justice Center. So welcome, Professor Hatcher. Next we have with us Neka Onzurike. Neka is a policy advisor, donor organizer, writer, and the founder of 929 Consulting Group, which is a racial justice and economic development consulting firm that works with institutions and communities to democratize capital and power. She advises the City of Chicago's Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice and leads their community wealth building initiative to support local democratic and shared ownership and control of community assets. She's the lead donor organizer for The Fields at Root Springs, which is a cooperatively owned healing and retreat center for BIPOC artists, organizers, and healers in Minnesota. So welcome, Neka. Next, we have with us Janae Moreno. She is the director manager at Turner Group and a program consultant for the Chicago Rehab Network Center for Shared Ownership. Janae's work builds linkages and awareness of local, federal, and national housing resource policies to develop and preserve affordable housing and sustainable community development. Ms. Moreno has been in community development for over 30 years, and her unwavering stand is that housing is a right and should be a key opportunity for wealth asset building for Americans of all typologies, including immigrants and communities of color. Ms. Moreno is a consultant for the Chicago Rehab Network, which is a coalition of neighborhood-based community development corps, promoting affordable housing throughout Chicago. She serves as the director of cooperatives and advocacy for the Chicago Mutual Housing Network. Presently, her work is focused on shared ownership models for preservation and development of affordable ownership. Welcome, Janae. And last but not least, we have with us Aisha Butler, who is the president and co-founder of the Residents Association of Greater Englewood, who in 2010, a longtime resident of Greater Englewood, mobilized her community and co-founded RAGE. And RAGE is a grassroots organization with the mission of mobilizing people and resources to force change in Greater Englewood. Her leadership with RAGE has been instrumental in uplifting, inspiring, and really changing the perception, as well as garnering critical resources for Englewood. She serves on several boards and councils to ensure that residents have a voice to address the issues that they face, including the chair of Englewood Quality of Life, Housing and Public Spaces Task Force. She leads the Buy Back the Block home ownership campaign, and RAGE served as the lead organization for the Englewood Public Safety Task Force. Aisha recently founded her own real estate development company to ensure that housing development in Englewood happens from the bottom up to avoid gentrification and displacement of current residents. And as a key community strategist and advocate, Aisha has become one of the most recognized and powerful voices in the community, and we're so lucky to have all of our panelists with us this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea Moore and Malik James, who will moderate our discussion this afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you for the introductions, Tolu. Thank you to the audience and to the panelists for joining us today. I am Chelsea Moore, the president of the Society of Black Urban Planners, and we have my co-moderator, Malik James, who is the vice president of Society of Black Urban Planners. So the goal of this roundtable discussion is for us to have an open conversation on how we can build a more just, democratic, and resilient communities through solidarity economies. So while there are some specific questions for each panelist, anyone on the panel is free to respond, and we will have time for Q&A at the end for the audience. So our panelists will share their values, strategies, and experiences that align with the emerging solidarity economy movement. So what is the solidarity economy? It is an economy that embodies the values of economic and social justice, diversity, cooperation, self-management, and ecological sustainability. Growing out of social movements in Latin America and the Global South, a solidarity economy provides real alternatives to capitalism, where communities govern themselves through participatory democracy, cooperatives, and public ownership, and a culture of solidarity and respect for the earth. So here are some of the principles of solidarity economy. Solidarity being at the top: equity, democracy, sustainability, and pluralism. So let's dive into our discussion. Sure that the spotlight is on our panel.
All right, I'll take care of that. Actually, Chelsea, I don't think I can. I'm not given that option. So you think you can do that?
Yes, I'm doing it, no problem.
All right, thank you.
Aisha, okay. We have everybody. Missing Renee. All right, there we go. We have everyone. So the first question: when we define solidarity economy as an alternative to capitalism that prioritizes people and the planet over endless profit and growth, it can seem a bit abstract and idealistic to many. So how can we ground this idea? Basically, in other words, what does solidarity economy mean and look like to you in the simplest term? And this is a question to anyone on the panel.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. Janae Moreno with the Center for Shared Ownership. I will tell you that what does it look like and what it means is something that has been a legacy of my family, who immigrated here from Haiti by way of many other countries as they were exiled. But in everything that my mother and father has ever done, it has been about a collective, and it's been about a community. And I'm not sure, for those who don't know Haiti, let me say that my parents were well-to-do types, right, so to speak, educated, had a profession, had family land handed down from ancestors to present, right? And we had within, especially within my grandmother's, my mother's side, she had a community of people, right? Some of them were people that served us as a family. So it wasn't just one person. It was the lead householder who helped with the farms, for example, right? But their children grew up with us, right? So there wasn't a separation of the children. All the children went to school together. School was at the house. We didn't go nowhere, but we all went to school together. We all went to church there. There wasn't a separation there, though we understood, right, that each family had their component. And so in the housing behind the main house, we had all these people, and we always came together as Christians, as owners of this space, right? To ensure that that community grew, right? So it's not necessarily that that community grew. Even then in Haiti, that was an interesting way of living and thought, right? And so it moved on to when my father was quite a person in his young age. He tried to overthrow the government with a few people a few times and finally got exiled. And even after being exiled, right, it was still looking back to say who else was part of the community that might be in danger or might not want to stay. How do we move people from that space to the next space? When we came to live in the United States, we lived as a community again. My father, our people. I couldn't, it's as an adult, I just found out that those that I thought were like family weren't family. So they were our people, right? And the word in Creole is c'est peuple, your people, I don't know how to say peuple in English, but these are your people. And so my father began this little interesting thing. I think it's just a takeover thing that he has inside of him. But he began when he worked at Florsheim Shoes here in Chicago, right? And felt that enough of the immigrants were getting the shaft, the bad hours, the da-da-da. He decided, you know what? We have enough people in our community who works for Florsheim Shoes, gathered them up, and everybody opened up a Florsheim shoe selling. They sold Florsheim shoes and was able to make better profit. They did it as a collective, right? And I will tell you, fought with the city to give retail sales space on Devon and by Admonton School, right? And so was able to pull that group together. And then as a group went to Florsheim and said, we'll buy from you, but we'll buy at our price, not what you're saying, right? And so was really able to move that forward. But it was a collective, right, that did that. I will tell you, moving forward in life, as he moved to Florida, he rolled up in Florida, worked as a car wash. He saw how many immigrants, and he's really focused with immigrant work. So he saw how many immigrants was working at these car washes, getting paid nothing, right? And did a similar takeover, was able to pull enough of the immigrants together, find out who had papers, find out who didn't. Let's take care of the core issues because the foundation we need to stand on will require certain things. And then took over that car wash. Today, that car wash is, you're gonna say I don't drive cars. Today, that car wash does detailing for the manufacturers that's bringing cars into the place you buy car, the auto shop, the automobile buying car place. That's right. I don't drive, folks. So, right. So that's what I know about collective economics. That's what I know about community building. And I will tell you, in my career, and people at the Rehab Network, Center for Neighborhood Technology will tell you that I drive them crazy about the processes and the outcome, because it's not just the doing, it's the outcome. How does that move further? I drive them crazy about, well, I hear your goal, I hear your vision, I got that, but what's the outcome here, right? What is that we're really trying to do? Because that's what I believe collective, at the bottom line, the footing which collective economics of any kind sits on is what is the outcome to the beings that's part of that collective.
I love that. A very great point. Thank you for sharing your history, your father's history. I also heard just the entrepreneurial element of what your father did, and that's also an aspect of solidarity economy. Did anyone else want to respond to the question? How do you ground the idea? What does it mean to you, and what does it look like to you? What does solidarity economy mean to you? Anyone else?
Yeah, I can try to take a shot at that. So I want to just echo that and thank Janae for that beautiful story, because I feel like it speaks to the history of Black solidarity economy, of Black cooperative development, but also all these different aspects that I think are alive in solidarity economy development. And really at the heart, I think, of solidarity economy, and I think at least your story for me, what resonated was care and how people take care of each other, agency, so how people can actually have the agency to take control and benefit from their own labor. And I think at the heart of what the solidarity economy movement tries to do is to put certain tools of a really deep democratic practice in the hands of like everyday community folk, residents, right? And from a planning perspective, or from a community economic development perspective, I think so much of it is really about the basic notion or the premise that the folks who are living in certain communities, who are living in the city of Chicago, the people who actually live in certain neighborhoods are in the best position to know what they need, what their priorities are, and how can we start to build institutions that they can control collectively for their own benefit, right? So it's deeply, for me, I think about this idea of self-determination, about how we care for each other, about how we build institutions differently and control those institutions so that they actually work for us. And you know, all of those resonated so much just with the story you shared. So I just want to thank you for that, Janae.
That's a really great point of gathering and creating these spaces where people can control institutions. I think that point fits perfectly into the larger theme of reshaping the normal, which in part is inspired by the fact that the normal has not worked for Black and Brown communities. And not to mention how this past year, this pandemic has unearthed many inequities the normal. So a follow-up question to that, in your own practices, for anyone on the panel, what are some of the normative approaches and conditions that cooperative economics seeks to dismantle and replace? I think you briefly touched on it, Professor Renee.
I guess you do want to go? I see both of us with the mute. Could you just repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so in your own practice, what are some of the normative approaches and conditions that cooperative economics and beyond cooperative economics, community-led planning, worker co-ops, housing co-ops, shared ownership, collective ownership, what do you think these alternatives seek to dismantle and replace?
Yeah, that is what I thought you said. I just wanted to make sure I was answering it correctly. Aisha Butler of Rage. And I think what it dismantles for me is the individualism. I do feel like we are, the capitalist approach is a very individualist approach. And it's not around that communal support. It is not folks working, you know, in concert with each other. It's everybody's trying to get their own and not thinking about their brother or their sister or their neighbor who is right next to them. And I think it dismantles, I mean, I think we've all lived in a society where that has been the norm. And so when you start talking about cooperative economics or you start talking about solidarity and a solidarity economy, it dismantles what we're used to, you know, and you're thinking about others. And I love the way Janae said that she didn't even know folks was not her family because they interacted so much like family. And I think it disrupts that because right now that is not typically the way folks interact. And I think once you kind of ground yourself with, hey, we're going to barter with each other, we're going to share resources, we're going to share opportunities for all of us to grow and thrive, which is a lot of the things that we try to do. It takes away this kind of competitive, individual, capitalist type of mindset. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, I think for me, a lot of this work is about like, what does it mean to be in right relationship and in right relationship with yourself, in relationship with others, as well as the land, in a way that you really do have reciprocal, communal relationships and you're not thinking about yourself over others or yourself at the expense of others and trying to exploit others, even the land. And so for me, I actually got into this work through donor organizing and resource mobilization. And a lot of that, a lot of Janae's story kind of resonated with me. And, my parents are from Nigeria, and I was actually just speaking to a few folks the other day about a couple of years ago, I went back home to Nigeria, and seeing the way that my family lives there and is in the village and has there are family plots of land and folks who just are, you're walking around and your cousin and your aunt and your second cousin are just all in one area, and everyone's food is everyone's food, right? Everyone's resources are everyone's resources, and it isn't, mine versus yours. And it's interesting through migration, the ways in which some of those, traditions and norms have stayed with us and stayed with me and my family, and also the ways in which some of those things have kind of dissipated, right? And for my family, I grew up in an upper middle class family and had everything that I needed growing up, and felt actually, I'm new to Chicago and spent about 5 years living in Minneapolis, which is where I was really politicized and radicalized through a lot of the things that were happening there, but felt like really isolated from folks within the community. And I think one of the things that I realized about myself was the way that money and class works in this country, and the way capitalism works is to isolate folks, right? Is to isolate us from community, is to make you think you have to do everything alone, that you need to acquire and hoard more money in order to figure out everything on your own rather than to share. And folks who have class privilege are really rooted and steeped in that mindset. And so, there was a number of incidents in Minneapolis, from the murder of Jamar Clark to Philando Castile, where folks were really mobilizing. And for me, as a Black person who was in that space, was also in a really radical artist community there, felt really engaged in wanting to get engaged in movement work, but also felt like, I have class privilege. And a lot of these experiences I actually haven't really felt firsthand, right? Because my class has sheltered me from a lot of the ways, the most brutal and violent ways in which racism shows up in this country. And that's when folks kind of introduced me to this concept around resource mobilization and donor organizing. And what does it really look like to be in right relationship with money and capital as well, right? There's so much healing that needs to be done with the ways in which we associate with ourselves. And so that's a lot of the work that I've been thinking about around capital and land, is that, to your question, Chelsea, around, what are some of those normative principles? I think hoarding is one of them that I'm really trying to break down. And I think solidarity economy really tries to break down that we don't need to be hoarding. There's abundance. There's an abundance of resources, right? There's no scarcity here. If we were only to really rethink and reshape how we distribute these resources and allocate these resources, then everyone would be able to have what they need. But right now we live in a system that says there's only so much, so every man for themselves.
Thank you all for your responses. You guys did a brief touch on the history, your own personal experiences. That was a beautiful way to answer those questions. For Professor Renee, I had the opportunity to read the Chicago Workers Co-op Guide, and I learned about the recent Chicagoland Regional Co-op convening that took place in November 2020 all throughout 2021. There has been a lot of support and momentums around cooperative economics, specifically worker co-ops. Why do you think that the momentum is building around worker co-ops? And why do you think that more businesses are converting to these models?
My dog might interrupt us, so just to warn everyone ahead of time. So, I think it's really exciting. The last few years in Chicago has been really exciting, just around how folks have been thinking about co-op development, solidarity economy, I think emergence of ever growing, solidarity economy kind of network in Chicago. So there have been a number of convenings. There have been, I think, iterations of collections of folks coming together trying to really build the types of institutional infrastructure to help support the growing worker co-op development ecosystem, the solidarity economy ecosystem here in the city. And so that's really exciting. And what I would say is I think part of that is likely because, as we've seen in history, there tend to be a proliferation of co-ops, worker co-ops, different types of co-ops, right, in moments of crisis. And so in many ways, it feels like we've been in perpetual economic crisis now for several decades. And so I think we see more and more folks turning to worker co-op development as a strategy to really give agency to anchor jobs in Black and Brown communities here in the city, you know, that may or may not have like a strong commercial corridor or not, but really trying to create the institutions that we want and we need. And also in part of that too is explicitly creating the kinds of jobs that we need, right? So wage theft, worker exploitation, sexual harassment on the job are huge issues specifically for Black folks in Chicago and in the country broadly, right? But millions of dollars every week go unpaid to Black workers in wage theft. I think part of what we see is that some folks are directly turning away from the mainstream economy or the formal economy and starting worker co-ops as a way in which to create better jobs, better economic opportunities. And so I think we've seen that quite a bit. And yeah, the other thing I would say is like, I just think there's also somewhat of an awakening around capitalism and how it is, late stage capitalism is affecting our larger society, right? And so I think it's things like the way in which we see the climate crisis every day on the news. When we see certain types of weather conditions that become more and more extreme because we know it's the climate crisis, or the ways in which we see the 1%, you know, increase their wealth substantially during the pandemic and during this crisis, while we know a lot of what or a lot of the ways that which community folks or folks who lost their jobs during the pandemic actually got by was through mutual aid networks, or was through, you know, relying on their support systems and their familial systems and really engaging in the economy in a different way to get the things that they need, right? And I think that all of that is what the solidarity economy is trying to uplift, support, and proliferate to allow us, again, to be in a situation where we can control our own destinies, provide for the things that we need, build the types of institutions that actually are going to serve our needs.
I think that's a great point. Hi, everyone. I'm Malik. I'm the vice president with the Society of Black Urban Planners. And I do think that that's a great point in creating that representation so that we can accurately give people and communities what they need. I feel like when we are looking at what is needed from a capitalistic perspective, as Ms. Aisha mentioned, we kind of focus on the competition that capitalism brings, as opposed to the communal aspects that Ms. Janae mentioned in taking care of one another. Those historic and systematic issues are ingrained in Chicago as well as many other cities. So would you each be able to, could you each talk more about what you do and why you feel that collective or community ownership is the approach that moves your mission forward, as opposed to for instance, capitalism or any other ideas that we've discussed?
Well, I will start with that, but I also want to add, and it's again kind of the words that are coming out of this. We use the word practice, and we use the word replace. And so in talking about what the work that I do through the Center for Shared Ownership, I really want to illuminate two big issues. And a third piece that I'm going to put in is the opportunity for which in a capitalist society, accountable to CFO, CEOs, and all the big, folks on top, it's really about, can they bring the dollars? Even in our political structure, right? And I'm going to show my age way back when I was very, very, very young. In Illinois, we had a multi-member district, and the multi-member district forced the issue of accountability by saying, I, as a voter, had 3 votes. I can vote for a Republican, I can vote for a Democrat, or I can vote for the third highest. Or I can choose to put my 3 votes in one hat. But those 3 that got elected, no matter what hat I put my vote in, to work together to bring me that voter and voters like me in that multi-member district, right? What our the needs and interests of our community, right? So we didn't just have one person to beat up on, or one person that can be bought out by big company. We had 3 people that must connect to bring resources to their community. Politically, that was the closest one could get to a collective opportunity. And that got given away. Right now, it's every elected official for themselves. Yes? And so I use that as an extreme, as an example of why, my why, the big why of why I continue to push it and even integrate it in spaces that even people who are practicing it somewhat don't want to call it collective or don't want to call it a cooperative, right? So I will tell you that within those spaces where it exists openly, right, one has to pay attention to process, right? So democratic practice. I like that we use it's a democratic practice. It's not perfect. We're going to have to keep doing it over and over. There's things that may change depending on people, time, and space, right? But it is a practice, like medicine is a practice. We're dealing with humans, so therefore we're going to have to meet people where they're at. And based on where they're at, we're practicing different models, different ways to build involvement, right? So with the Center for Shared Ownership, we recognize that the Chicago Mutual Housing Network defunct some years back. One of the big things that we were able to do was really push to create a momentum of the limited equity cooperatives that existed. And these were properties that used to be government supported properties that their financial maturity came to be. What are we going to do with all these poor people? And poor people across the nation in these LIPRA buildings said, why can't we own it? Right? And own it as a collective, right? And so through that limited equity movement, right, we then begin really looking at how do we continue to educate others about this level of collective living, right? Where in a cooperative, your carrying charge is not your rent. It's the general operating money that's necessary to make the building alive, right? And that your certificate, which equals to the unit you're living in, doesn't mean that you solely are the one responsible for that unit, because what you do or don't do will impact the next thing, right? And so in that ideology of cooperative housing, right, what we saw in some of those spaces and places is people coming together and opening up their own daycare center. 3 or 4 of the women or the men came together and say, hey, enough business here, we could do a daycare center, and opening up a daycare center as a collective. So one practice helps another practice move forward, right? And so for the Center for Shared Ownership, as this, we got more and more people calling the rehab network accessing cave because Mutual Housing Network is no longer there. Chicago Community Loan Fund, who's the other partner in the program, has specific financial products for cooperatives, right? For their common area, but there was no one creating new ones, right? The government wasn't creating anymore, right? People individually were having challenges finding the dollars to do so. So I will tell you, Center for Shared Ownership hopes to meet 2 outcomes. One is to create the policies across the board in Illinois whether you're talking about real estate policy or financial policies with these financial institutions, that takes on the responsibility to fund and to provide capital for these new bodies of work and people and companies that's being done. Because today in Illinois, you'd be hard pressed to find a loan share, right? A share loan that would help you buy your share in whatever it is, be it a business or your housing, right? Unless you've got the ability to save that $20, $30, or $40,000. And for some, it's less than that. But you know, your $2,000 versus my $2 is the difference between $1 million to me, if I only have to, right? So whatever the amount is that share loan is, unless you're able to do a personal loan, unlike anything else, you cannot get in, right? Unless all of you as a collective together say, we're going to put our personal, credit in play to open up this business together, right? You cannot do a share loan to be part of. So we hope to impact these types of policies that recognize and respect the tool that is collective economics, right? The other thing we hope to do is to incite and create new ones, right? And not just cooperative housing, but across the shared ownership modeling. So we focus on townhomes, we focus on condos, and we focus on cooperative housing. And we're all focused on housing because we really believe that housing is foundation, right? And as the worker solidarity movement is moving across the nation, one of the things that those of us that do this collective work around housing is we walk in the room and say, right, sweet would it be that with that same cooperative business, they're living in a cooperative house and vice versa, right? How cool could that be, right? That one supports and though autonomous, but still live in that same energy of cooperative movement. And so this is the reason I tell folks, yes, my company does a lot of stuff, but both Arthur Turner, who's the lead principal, and myself, we are committed to, right, that collective. But can I tell you my real on this? That collective accountability. It's something else when you tell somebody I'm going to get up tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock and you don't, right? As opposed to telling myself, and I've been telling myself this since January, I'm going to lose that and use the machines that's holding my coats right now. And this morning I woke up at 6 o'clock, rolled over, and who was I accountable to? But myself, right? I will say to you that I believe, and I'm going to tell you all of them, that's using the principles for gains, but not necessarily for collectiveness. Any program that has subscription, they're using what we're talking about for their gains, right? They make us feel buying that subscription to Sam's Club, right? A togetherness, Sam's Club, they make us feel as though, this is a collective working together to lower the prices. No, folks, we're paying $49 every year, or whatever we're paying for the privilege of letting them take our money, right? But what is that money doing for my community? Is it really saving us the resources? Do I find the products that I need for me, as opposed to them pushing what products is easier to sell, right? And I will tell you another group that used this collective idea. McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. I swear to you, I could almost want to bet money that I could tell you that they sat in the room together and says, yes, we'll be competitors, but we can be competitors as a collective, because there's enough money out here for all of us to make. And so you sell your burger the way you sell your burger, and I'll sell my burger the way I sell my burger. We won't trash each other. We will work with each other, and we will put our stores right in the same, excuse my language, damn corner, and watch all of them come in here and make the money, right? They came to a consensus, right? And I believe solidarity and collectivism requires not agreement, consensus. And I think that consensus and accountability is at the core of any principle that you look at when you think about solidarity. Sorry, I'm quite passionate about this issue.
Amazing, amazing, amazing comments. Wow. If I could just snap, if I had a snap emoji, I would do it. Thank you so much for those points on collective. I love that collective accountability, consensus and accountability. Those are words that are ringing out to me, and I want to continue this conversation about community ownership, collective ownership. Aisha, you are one of the leaders in the Inglewood community, Rage, and you all have recently promoted the Re-Up initiative, Rage Economic Upliftment Project. I believe that the idea behind it is community ownership, keeping the dollar in the community through real estate. Can you talk more about the vision of Re-Up and the goals behind, and also a little bit about community planning? Because you guys do a lot of problem solving in Rage for the Inglewood community. Can you speak to that?
Sure, thank you, Chelsea. So I think if folks are not familiar with Inglewood, the community in general, it's probably like a microcosm of like a bad urban area, urban area gone bad. So like for decades, resources have been starved from this community. There's very little economic growth here. And so I think we've always, as residents here, have thought about like, how could we build our own economy with each other? And then also make sure that the Blacks who are in this community are the ones who are really the owners of this community. As we sit right now, we're about 93%, we were 99% African-American, but we have no more than about 60 Black-owned businesses here. So, or resident businesses, folks who live here who actually own a business. So every year, and we even looked at a study that really kind of started on this journey back in 2014 and 15, where $194 million of retail leakage leaves our community every year. And I'm sure it's much more now. And so we've been, for us, we're like, well, how do we at least kind of get that money back, rotating back into the community, back into with the residents? And so the Re-Up is really designed to look at economics in every facet. So not necessarily just in real estate, that is one way, but also just getting people working and actually having a job, but working with some of the Black-owned businesses that are here. So if you have a business here, you hire locally, now this dollar is starting to rotate. One of the things that was really alarming to us with the civil unrest was when the looting happened and everything happened and we came out, we didn't see people who looked like us who was cleaning up their businesses. And so it was interesting to see that the majority of the community is African-American, but the folks who were actually cleaning up their businesses and actually making money did not look like any of us. And so that made us go down a path of really looking at the population of like Little Village and Chinatown and comparing that to Inglewood in terms of the number of businesses per resident. And so now we want to, we're very ambitious, purchase commercial properties ourselves as a nonprofit to actually solicit Black-owned businesses or help expand the Black-owned businesses that are actually in Inglewood. So that's one facet of the Re-Up. And then real estate is also, home ownership is also an issue here. Right now, only about 24 to 27% of us live and own in this community. So technically to us, our community belongs to someone else, right? And so how do we get more of us actually buying, investing, owning, and living here. And so we do that through our Buy the Block program, which is a home ownership program. And so that is kind of we were doing that work before, we just never kind of put all those elements together into the re-up. And the re-up is very clear. When you think about the re-up, it's, you know, abundance, it's coming back more. This community has been starved. There's so many reports from, you know, land contract sales. The majority of the large institutions here do not hire locally, you know, are Black-owned businesses. So it's all these different facets that we're trying to disrupt through this initiative. We are not a huge organization, but we have over 400 members in Rage who are all throughout Inglewood. And so we feel like as long as they know what we do and why we're doing it, they're kind of our ambassadors to help us increase this and really grow this program. One thing that we do as well, and I was thinking about what Janae was saying about Sam's Club, we're a membership organization. So for us, folks pay dues, and we wanted to do that particularly because we're not a social service agency. We wanted the residents to say, if I'm a part of something, I also invest in it as well. And so from a beginning, from 2010, if you live in community, you pay $25 a year. If you don't live in a community, you pay $20 a year. And people will say, well, why is the residents paying more? Because this is a neighborhood association. They should own this association. They should contribute to this association and help us with the work, you know, collectively. And that's what we do. So we're really excited about the re-up. We're looking at commercial development. We're also looking at residential development. I've actually rehabbed a home before, so we want to get more of us doing that. How do we work together? I'm a part of an investment group where we pay collectively into a pot to purchase properties, you know, separate from Rage. And so that is pretty much aligned with everything that we do, because you could talk about the violence, you could talk about the health disparities, but at the end of the day, if our economy is suffering and starving and sick, all those other things are what kind of spills out as outcomes. And so we want to go right to the root, which is our economy, and then figure out how do we really reshape this in Inglewood. A heavy lift, but, you know, we're in it. And we, you know, that's why we love students and talking to universities, because we feel like the more and more younger people we can talk to, they can kind of keep this kind of legacy going in Inglewood, and eventually it will be owned by us. Right now, our community, I cannot say that we own our community, and it's unfortunate.
Really, really, really great points. Great initiative, amazing work with Rage. You have been amongst a lot of the who's who's, and we see your name a lot concerning Inglewood. So thank you for the work that you do. If no one else tells you, thank you, thank you. Nneka, you have been a part of also community wealth building initiatives in the city of Chicago, being the community wealth building advisor for the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. So the city of Chicago has made efforts to support elements of solidarity economy. And there has been a huge win for the cooperatives economy with the $15 million grant for community wealth building initiatives. Can you speak about this grant, this initiative, and why it's a huge win for solidarity economies?
Yeah, you know, I think this work really started with the office talking about equitable economic development. And, you know, when we first started this work, a lot of folks here in the city talk about wealth building. Well, everyone talks about wealth building in a very different way. Everyone uses that term and everyone means a very different thing when they use it. But a lot of it, when it came to real estate development, was thinking about jobs, you know, primarily temporary jobs, a handful of permanent jobs, and then also developers of color. Like those were the two main things folks kept talking about over and over again. And this is how we're building wealth and community. And I think that, you know, when you look at it, you know, those things are important, but they're not sufficient. And I think everything that Asia just said is a huge testimony to the fact that there's a lot of communities that are low income, low wealth, that have been severely disinvested from that aren't actually given opportunities to actually own and steward the businesses, the homes, the land, the commercial real estate, the everything, all the assets in their community. And so for us in the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, it was really coming from it of, okay, well, what is a true way to think about wealth building in these communities and really broadly throughout the city? And, I think the initial frame, which I think sometimes the frame for this work in government and in large institutions is, how are we going to close the racial wealth gap? And I think, in a lot of conversations, and I'm even thinking back to a couple conversations with Renee and other folks from our working group of, that's not even the right frame here, right? Like, there is no closing the racial wealth gap under capitalism, right? We all know that. And so like, what does it mean for an Office of Equity and Racial Justice to be a part of this conversation, right? And I think that looks different than other offices and departments. And so for us, it was about true ownership and control of community assets that led us to community wealth building, that led us to doing a lot of research around various models like worker cooperatives, limited equity housing cooperatives, community land trusts, community investment vehicles, all around the country and the world. And then trying to figure out, well, what is happening here in Chicago? Why isn't more of that happening? What are the barriers to that happening from policies, investment, et cetera? So we, with a lot of support from folks on this call and not to really educate us on some of the things that we need to be thinking about, we started to put together a community wealth building strategy that really focused on solidarity economy principles. And so we now have this huge win of having $15 million as a part of the Chicago Recovery Plan to execute a pilot project. We know that we want to do kind of 2 core things with that work, and maybe actually 3 core things. I think the first thing is, folks named over and over again, is that we need to support the community wealth building ecosystem. I think oftentimes government kind of selects winners, right? And kind of goes in and says, we're going to pick this community area or this CBO or this person, and we're going to put all this money into this pilot project, and that's going to be it. But, this work shouldn't really be government led, right? The whole point of this is that it needs to be community led. So over and over, we kept asking this question, like, what really is the role of government in a way that doesn't lead to co-opting this work, right? And so one of the big answers was, okay, support the ecosystem players, right? Support the clinics like Renee's clinic that are doing the legal support and advocacy, support the folks who are doing the community education and the outreach, support the folks who are incubating co-ops, who are trying to buy real estate, like all of that. Support those players because they're the ones who are going to still be here when perhaps government no longer is, right? So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think we do need some large scale proofs of concept. Like I think oftentimes this work is really marginalized in a way that kind of is dismissive of, oh, that's an interesting thing that you all are doing over there in the corner, but here's our economic development policy and strategy, and that thing kind of sits over there in the corner. But to say that, actually, we really see this as being an alternative, right? Meaning that it really can be the way that we do things at a large scale. So that's the second piece, right? Focus on the ecosystem, but then secondly, how can we really make the case that there can be large scale pilots or large scale projects with these principles that the city can kind of invest around? So those are 2 concrete things. But I think the third thing, which I'll add, is the process piece, where, what does it really look like to share power with community is, I think, a question that, we as a city are starting to have more conversations around, and I think needs to be, going back to Janae, like practice, right? Like, what does it look like to be in a practice around this, to actually make an attempt to it, make a commitment to actually attempt to do that, to know that you'll make mistakes, and to know that like we're going to keep iterating on this to continue to find new models of just process. How do we govern, right, ourselves in a new way? How do we make decisions collectively and together? And how can the city, kind of shift power so that community members not only have a voice, but are truly like the, lead stakeholders in this work. So we're at the beginning phases of like this second piece now of moving into implementation. But I do think that a lot of the work over the last year is a testament to, some of the commitment in the mayor's office.
Congratulations for that. And again, thank you for the work that you do as well with this initiative. Now we will shift to the Q&A from the audience. Malik, can you read those questions that we have?
Yes, for sure. So our first question for the Q&A is, how could we reverse our thinking from the zero-sum concept to improve economic conditions for everyone? Then the next question, I'm going to also post these in the chat so that everyone can see them. What are some success?
No. Sorry.
And, the last question is, what are the roles of planners interested in this movement? How do we as planners support this movement? What does that look like? So I'm gonna post these in the chat and give everyone a few minutes. Oh, here they are in the chat. Great.
You know,
So-
I'll jump in
go ahead.
on the how do we reverse our thinking? I again I don't know it's so much of reversing our thinking, but going back to, especially within the Black community, the immigrant community, right? The Great Migration didn't happen by itself, right? It is now called the Great Migration, but the stories that we've learned about the Great Migration is it took a community to say, you fine, right, are going to go to Chicago, because we hear that's where the jobs, right? And we're each in that community. I learned about I have to tell you, I wasn't well versed in African American history, and I'm learning about it more and more, right? And so I remember there was a co-op that is called the Gunningson Cooperative, and it was called that because of the many people who migrated from that place to Chicago, and their stories were, we left family and ancestors behind and came as a group within that Gunningson community to make it here. And it took everybody from that Gunningson community, I think it's in Mississippi, had to, that community put money in the pot, right? Fried the chicken, get the boiled egg, and got that group out to make it here, right? In the name of their ancestors and the families that they left behind. But they didn't come by themselves, right? They came as a group. They entered someone's home, be it Aunt so-and-so or Miss this and that came before them. They were all in that house together until everybody got a footing and was able to get their own, right? And 9 times out of 10, they all lived in the same neighborhood, an alley away from each other, right? That all going to the same church. So I don't think it's a reverse thing. I really think it's about how do we regain, with all this DNA stuff we're doing and learning, how do we regain that sensitivity and sensibility of, I can't say it enough, holding each other accountable, right? So that we do better, right? And so that we're not only creating new change, because new change is necessary, but we're remembering all of the times that it was a collective that made it happen, right? And then how do we, with that legacy, with that history, with the charge that our ancestors had laid before us, step up to it? That's where I would like to go with that, right? So how do we do that? And I'm going to tell you how we do that is by teaching ourselves and our children that history, that foundational history that was laid, and that it is now calling us, in spite of all the juice that they gave us, that individualism is it, capitalism is where you got to go, grow up, go to school, leave the community, and do better. All that story, Michael Jordan cannot sell a $24 million home, folks. Right? Individually. But that same home, if it had been built in one of our communities, edify that community, right? Then there would be no need to say this very rich Black man who cannot sell a $24 million home, right? And so again, how do we do that, right? And again, I'll say the way we do that is education of our past, creating new opportunities like the city is doing, like Aisha is doing, right? And continue to do the stuff that will edify and educate us about what's possible, right? And trust and believe, I'm not saying what's possible is easy. It is hard, like anything else is hard. We call it community and family. We got everything in community and family. There's family members that you got to say that baby is special, but you keep bringing that baby along, don't we? Yes? Okay, so we have our special people, and we will have our educators, and we will have our historians. We got to recognize what each person brings, accept them for who they are, but move the community forward nonetheless. That's what I think is necessary.
Yeah, and I think what Janae is saying, I think is which I love, and I just want to echo, is that many of the answers, many of the solutions are already within us, right? That this isn't new. This practice of solidarity, this practice of cooperativism isn't new. It comes from a heritage and a history, specifically of African people, right? That by and large, we need to turn to for answers as well, right? And so many of the solutions are already within us. And part of what I think this work allows us to do in a really beautiful way, right, is to also get the ways in which colonialism, in which slavery, in which colonial settlerism has more or less like gotten in our story. How do we get it out of our story? How do we decolonize? How do we think about the solutions that are rooted in a history and a practice? And then I was just going to add, in terms of, so I'm not a planner. I'm interested in planning, and a lot of planning ideas come up in the process of doing community economic development work. But I think there's a lot of similarities in being a lawyer in this space, right? Because one of the things I wanted just to say is that I think we tend to professionalize either some of these strategies in certain ways, or we tend to think that we need professionals to implement certain things. And so I think part of what needs to happen, or what I would think about as a planner, or what I try to think about as a lawyer, is like, how can I deeply be in community with the folks who I'm working with, who I'm representing? I think about solidarity, not only as the goal of the projects that we're advancing, but ultimately also in my relationships, professional and otherwise. And I think that speaks to sometimes the ways in which we have to resist the disconnect between folks who are in certain types of professions and trying to work in or with community. And so that's one thing I would just have folks to think about as they enter this space, or as they consider what that might look like.
And I just want to add, because we work a lot with planners, and very similar to what Aneka said about the city and the government. I mean, I think sometimes people say, oh, you're underground, you're the community. And it's almost like as if they discount their abilities and their thoughts and their vision to move kind of things forward. And so sometimes the interactions that we have had with planners have kind of been this kind of top-down approach, or more so like, we have the skill, you don't have this skill, and we can help you through this process. And I just think, I've always said, how do we build, don't plan for me, let's plan with us, and then, and really think about ways that all of us are kind of on an equal footing in terms of our subjects, what we are experts on. I tell our members all the time, you are a subject matter expert on Inglewood, just simply because you live here. And so regardless if you have a degree or have a background, this community, what will work, what you will like, what you don't. And I know we, dealing with the city, we're always kind of bombarded with, these credentials of planning. And at the end of the day, I think we have that, we can work way more in alignment. And especially Black planners, because our communities are really the areas that truly need deep rooted, culturally sensitive type of planning, and like having that lens as you do it when working with community, and not looking at it from a place of class or a place of education, you know, just all of us kind of in this together working through it. So I would definitely, you know, be interested in, you know, talking to more planners, especially if folks are doing some work around Inglewood, and just to learn more. Our motto is always connect, build, and then take action. So it's really important to connect with the community first before you kind of go into your deliverables and take action and do that. Really connect, learn the culture. And I know our work has always been to how do we shape the culture first before we even get into planning or community development or anything, because it doesn't matter what plan or if it's a Whole Foods or whatever you try to plop into our community. If the culture is not there, it just won't work.
Thank you.
I would agree. And
Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
definitely, I would agree and definitely would want to, again, put a dot, really emphasize that we are subject matter. We've been told. We're not. It's been a lie. We know this. And so we are the subject matter within our communities, however you define community for yourself. And when we bring experts, because they have a degree, right? And in certain industry, they call it a discipline, right? They're not experts. They have a discipline. And the discipline is electrical. The discipline is blah. So as a planner, you have a discipline. And within that discipline, you must humble oneself, right? To recognize your constituency that you will be working for or working with, right? And so that's the thing I wanted to lift up from what Aisha said is, it's not just understanding the culture, but being able as one with the discipline. You're the one who spent the years in school. You're the one, right? That discipline is only valuable if you can bring it and meet us where we're at. Don't expect that I understand it. I didn't go to school 7 years for it, right? I lived here 7 years, so I can tell you about that. And how do we marry the two, right? And so as planners, especially as up and coming planners, remember it's a discipline that you have, right? That you practice. And when you come to communities to practice, humble yourself to hear us, not us hear you, to hear us so that you could be your best in the deliverable that community needs. Yes?
Yes, I think that's a great point. I really appreciate that. The planners needing to humble themselves or ourselves almost should be rephrased as being a part of the discipline, something that's a necessity when we go to practice. So I really appreciate that.
Well, we are over time. I want to ask if you all have any final remarks. I think that was a powerful closing statement from Janae and Aisha, but do you all have any final remarks?
I just thank you for having us. It was a great discussion. Very powerful panelists. I appreciate you guys doing this and having this discussion around the economy, planning, community. So that's my last words. Look up Rage, rageinglewood.org, if you want to stay in touch.
Yeah, I want to add my thanks to the panel as well. And one thing I did want to say, I definitely want to take every opportunity I get to thank NECA also in being a person on the inside at the city of Chicago who has pushed, I think, the city to economic development, community wealth building for so long. And, again, the initiative that she spoke about definitely would not have happened without her tireless efforts in actually changing a lot of minds internal to the city.
Thanks, Renee. I just thank the panel. Thank you all for having me. It honestly is an honor to be amongst so many incredible people here. So thank you all. Also come work for the city. We're hiring. I think the more radical, progressive folks that we have on the inside pushing, the better. So there are a lot of planning positions that will be opening up soon. So I will send them out to all of you all. But yeah, thank you all. I'm just excited to continue to learn with you all and from you all.
Likewise, my gratitude to especially the two of you, Malik and Chelsea, to reach out and make sure that we were available and participatory in this. I also want to say hello to a bunch of people that I know, that I see on the list that I haven't seen in a long time in person. Hello, hello, love to even see your names if I can't see your face.
So I want to give a shout out to Professor Stacy Sutton. She is not on the call, but she teaches the Solidarity Economy course at UIC, and that was the inspiration behind this panel. So today we learned about holding each other accountable, collectivism for gain. Education that we have from our past will help teach ourselves how we can learn the blueprints that our forefathers laid for solidarity economies, working together as planners in partnership with the community to have deeply rooted cultural planning. So those are some of the keys that stood out for me for this panel. Malik, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I just really wanted to reiterate the point about collectivism for gain and knowing the difference between collectivism for gain and collectivism for that community benefit. Though I think that's a distinction that can oftentimes be blurred, especially living in a society that, once again, that Aisha mentioned, focus and prioritizes that personal gain. So I think having a conscious, being conscious of that is very important. And then as Ms. Janae mentioned, as Ms. Janae mentioned, oh wow, I just completely lost my train of thought. But yes, I just appreciate everything, this entire conversation for sure.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This panel does conclude the 12th Annual Urban Innovation Symposium. Thank you all for tuning in. I believe that Molly posted the information for the happy hour after this. I might have missed it, but thank you, panelists. Again, this is an amazing conversation. Feel free to post your information, your contact information for people who had specific questions, and how we can learn more about the work that you do. Thank you again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining this conversation, and have a good afternoon.